back with another rousing rendition of the Online Church Blueprint, and Mark seems to be a little uncomfortable today. Mark, would you like to explain what is actually going on in the studio around you right now?
Well, the state of Pennsylvania is covered in Canadia's smog right now, and I don't know if that has disabled my air conditioning in the studio or if refusing to do maintenance on anything in my life has caused the air conditioning to stop working, or if I bumped a setting on the remote. But as of right now, I am blowing lukewarm air around me. So hooray. Yeah, it's a little stuffy.
I'm going to blame the fires and not the maintenance. Is that okay?
Yeah, we can blame the fires. How dare you, Canada?
Yeah, like, why are you sending your fires towards us? It's not like we're doing anything to help, pollution and stuff going back up to Canada. So, like, come on, guys, you're supposed to be our ally here.
Everybody knows that water flows south because that's downhill. And so anything we dumped in the water goes to Mexico, not to Canada.
Oh, jeez.
That's just math.
Math. Not geography, that's math.
That's just math.
Yeah, well, what about the fact that the globe gets, like, rounder in the middle? Wouldn't you think it would go north at that case?
I'm a flat earther.
We're
at a slight tilt. A square that's at a slight tilt.
That makes sense. Man, we are learning so much here in the Online Church Blueprint. Hey, none of these views are those views held by Digital Church Network or Altar Live or even Lux Digital Church. These are the views held solely by Mark, a.k.a. The Lift. Listen, Mark, you were gone the last time we recorded. You and your family were in the great state of South Carolina, correct?
Yeah, we were in South Carolina. Then I was in the great state of Ohio as well. But I don't think I might have missed a recording because of that. That was like last week. So, yeah, we spent a week in Hilton Head with the family, took the girls down, which was great. Friends of ours have a house down there that they let us use for free. So it's a pretty inexpensive way to go get into the waves. So that was nice. We got away for a little bit.
I just did have a Discord message come in from somebody that was sitting over your left-hand shoulder. Greg Miller just said, Ohio is not great, and I would have to agree with him. All of our Ohio listeners, I'm sorry, your state needs to get a facelift. My Ohio dislike is pretty legendary in other podcasts and other venues.
Whenever I go to a new place in Ohio, I'm always surprised to find that people live there. I'm
Yes.
always like, oh my, there's people here. Like, so I was in what was Columbus, and I was like, there's people here.
Yeah, a
like,
lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I just never meet anybody who's from Ohio.
Oh.
Like, it's just rare.
Oh, see, I meet a lot of people from Ohio, and I do two things immediately. I pity them, and then I laugh at them. So the pity is just kind of my natural sort of pastoral response of like, oh, you made it out, congratulations. And then my laughing at them is, yeah, Ohio really stinks, huh? And that's my natural response.
Well, I know that this podcast doesn't have an enormous listener base, but let's hope most of that listener base is not in the great state of Ohio.
Or they're from Michigan and they're all nodding their heads and agreeing with me because that's, I'm from Michigan. That's how these things happen.
Yeah. And when I was in Ohio, I was with a couple of Michiganis, as you would call them. Mm-hmm. So we were with two members of our church. We were on a missions trip to a board game convention, which you might think isn't a missions trip. And I say that it is, but it was quite wild. But we met up with two members of our church who I've never met in person before, Michael and Justin, who are both from Michigan, and so we got a chance to they're from Grand Rapids area. We got a chance to hang out with them in person for the very first time on this mission trip, which was really, really cool. And in like a week I'm leaving again. We're going to Africa for 12 days, and in that trip I'll be meeting one of our elders at Lux for the very first time. I've never met him in person before, so
man, Digital Church. Yeah, Digital Church. This thing's catching on,
Yeah, more and more people, mission trips, the whole deal. So yeah, it's very real. It's very
real. Speaking of Digital Church, let's make the hard transition. Today we have a little bit of a lightning round, kind of a grab bag of topics. I had two that I kind of wanted to talk about and was like, you know what? I think we can jam them both in the same amount of time. So if you listen to our last episode, I had the great Kenny Zhang, who is overall good dude, overall tech nerd, former digital pastor of Liquid Church in New Jersey, a really big kind of progressive church that's doing a lot of awesome things. He's now the owner of Church Tech Today. He does the AI Expo, which has just happened 2 days ago as of this recording, and it was totally dope. Like, I logged in and was able to hang out with them for a little bit. Totally awesome. And Kenny joined us last episode to talk specifically about AI, because that's kind of he's kind of being formed into like an AI robot right now. And I think my camera just froze. Is that correct? Oh, there it is right now. I'm having some issues with my cam link, so I got to just kind of watch it. I'll cut this. We'll go back in 3, 2. And so Kenny was really kind of directing all of us into the idea of AI being used for the church. And it's actually, I wanted to revisit the topic with you, Mark, specifically, because you and I actually had conversations about AI. Oh, goodness. This is 6 months ago. And then we actually had a meeting with a guy a couple of weeks ago who is using AI to really design discipleship pathways. And one of the biggest questions I kind of wanted to ask you as follow-up from that episode is, where do you see AI helping the church, specifically digital church, right now? Where do you see this kind of this movement going?
That's a really great question. I've been tracking the AI stuff, ChatGPT stuff, image generators, and sort of been dabbling with it. I actually just had a meeting with a guy, hopefully it'll be on the show in the not too distant future, York Moore.
Yeah.
And he has recently released sort of like an article on digital ministry, digital ecclesiology, sort of like the next, I can't remember exactly what the name of the article is. And he
I'll link it. I'll link it below.
Okay, he co-authored it with ChatGPT. And really interesting because he said, when I got in there and I began saying like, hey, I would like to write this. I'm writing it to postdoctorate people from, such and such a seminary. And it sort of, the ChatGPT really reflected the type of individual that he is writing the article to in terms of language and tone and all of that sort of stuff. And so it's not, I think that people hear about AI and I think it's like one of two responses, right? A lot of times it's like, that's not going to go anywhere. Them kids and their iPads at the zoo. And I don't know why I said the zoo there, but there is usually someone named Linda who is taking pictures of animals at the zoo with her iPad. And I'm like, no one's going to look at those, Linda. No one ever wants to see the pictures of you take of caged animals, literally ever. We're all a little guilty that we're here. Please stop taking pictures of them. But all of that to say, it's like either sort of like it's not going to go anywhere, or it's completely dangerous, right? That AI is going to take over the world, and we sort of have like flashbacks to Terminator movies from our youth. And then I think there's those people who are just genuinely, they're like whole hog, right? They're all in. They're just like, let's see what this thing can do. So to answer your question, I think that AI is going to have a dramatic impact on a lot of industries. I think video editing, I think that sort of like design, graphic design specifically, I think writing, I think finance, I think there's going to be a lot of industries that are going to absolutely lose jobs. I think there'll be whole new type of jobs that have started, but I do think that AI could impact culture and various different jobs in a way that's not a whole lot unlike the way the internet has. In terms of, I think that there will be some positions that integrate into AI very quickly. I think the church will be, I think that how we do church stuff could be one of those things. And then I think eventually in, 10, 20 years down the road, mechanics who never thought they would use the internet, but now use it every day to work on cars, maybe we think that that industry would never use artificial intelligence. I think one day we'll very much so use artificial intelligence. So I think it's coming. I don't know if this is, I think that we're at the dawn of it, right? Maybe not the apex of it.
Oh yeah, certainly. I think we have a long way to go. And again, I got my terms right last episode when I said AI. We kind of chucked it out the window, but AI itself is not technically AI like we would think of Terminator and like we would think of sentient robots that are running around murdering humans. It's it's machine learning. It is large language models. It is lots of information, a lot of words that are put into these gigantic if-then databases, and then just it'll logic out issues. And it's happening at billions and billions and billions of calculations a second, and it seems artificially intelligent, but what it in fact is just a lot of logic puzzles. The biggest question I had asked Kenny was okay, so we've got this thing happening, like it's impacting the world, like rightly or wrongly. You look at what's the newest Marvel show, Secret Invasion, like they're using AI to generate assets for this Secret Invasion show, and people are getting angry about that. Where, like as pastors and as church leaders, where can we start to head the culture off at the pass a little bit and actually use this for our advantage? Like, what are the practical things we can be using AI for?
I think first off, we should just be at least familiar with it, and familiar with what's going on with it, right? No one's been sued yet. So the actual, what it's going to be, right? I saw a guy who sort of specializes in tech stuff online, and he was talking through some of this stuff. And he said what we see with ChatGPT is basically the equivalent of how we saw Napster impact the music industry.
Yeah.
And, Napster doesn't exist anymore, right? LimeWire doesn't exist anymore. Or maybe they do, just not in the form that they did. But the fact that all music is digital now and we have streaming services just shows this is like the legal form of what Napster intended to be, right? And so instead of downloading it all for free and risking pirating stuff, I paid $10 and do the same exact thing.
Right.
I just pay $10 a month to Amazon or to Apple Music or whatever, and it's just a legal version of the exact same thing. So no one's been sued yet, which tells me that there will be some version of ChatGPT AI that maybe is a little bit less dangerous, maybe a little bit less Wild West, that we'll find a way for it not to drain all of the jobs and find a way to monetize it in a way that's helpful. I think right now today a way that I've been using it is it can really help you structure sermons. I didn't use it for this yet, but in a couple of situations I've just gone on and been like, I wonder what ChatGPT would say if I said write a Mother's Day message. Well, as it turns out, wrote a really good Mother's Day message. And then I said, write this in the style of Craig Groeschel. And as it turns out, it looked like Craig Groeschel wrote a Mother's Day message for me. And you know what? It can't involve your personal stories and anecdotes and all of those sorts of things. But it does do a really excellent job of structuring, pulling scriptures, and it can even choose your specific, maybe political or theological persuasion that you want to angle into a sermon. Not that maybe you should or shouldn't do some of those things, but it will do that for you. And so if you have a congregation that you really need a challenge in a way, or you want to placate, right? That like you can do that, and it will actually kind of listen to that, which is alarming and very, very unique. And I think maybe the most alarming part is how smart it is about it. The thing that I've been using it for is like it's a glorified spell check. I will absolutely 100% take my my message, or I will take my email and I will pump it into ChatGPT and I will say, hey, can you check grammar and spelling on this and make sure I sound optimistic? And ChatGPT will rewrite my email to fix my grammar and spelling and give me an optimistic bent to my email. Because that isn't to say that it's writing it for me. I'm creating the content. I'm copy, cut, and pasting the content in. But I literally did that exact thing for our monthly newsletter out to our church supporters. I took everything that had happened and I pumped it into ChatGPT and I said, hey, can you make this optimistic and check grammar and spelling? And it did that. When I wrote a blog for the Church Digital called Confessions of a Digital Church Pastor recently, I pumped it into ChatGPT and said, hey, check grammar and spelling. And I want this to be very vulnerable. I want this to be very transparent. And it went through and helped me craft that language. And it helps me because I'm a very sort of like I just go with a flow of thought when I write, which is fine for preaching because no one sees my sermons, but it is very difficult to follow if you're not inside my brain. And ChatGPT does a really good job of taking what naturally flows out of my brain in terms of my writing and my language, and then it constructs that or puts it in a way that can actually be positively received or understood by the average person just picking it up. So I think like that basic thing is really well done. I think the ability to take your sermon and just say, hey, I want this to be on a ninth grade reading level. Take your sermon, throw it at ChatGPT, and say, could you rewrite this at a ninth grade reading level? That way you're sure that you're just going to be able to reach every person who's sitting in your pews and you're not talking over people's heads, because sometimes preaching and pastoring can kind of be a bit of an ivory tower. You suddenly assume that everybody has a seminary degree just because you do, and you will start to realize the things that you're preaching about no one cares about, because if they excite you after 30 years of ministry, they probably don't excite anybody else in the room. So I think ChatGPT is good for that. I could go on and on about what I think AI could potentially be used for, but those are certainly a couple of things. When Microsoft's AI come out, it'll be an entirely different beast. Just get ready for it because it's coming.
Well, that and the Google, what is it, the Google Sidekick or whatever, not Google Sidekick. I can't remember what the Google version of it is, but essentially Google has their own AI thing that's going to rival OpenAI, and that one's going to be, I feel like, a little more sinister than actual OpenAI's ChatGPT, because Google is obviously a search engine primarily that is selling information to companies for marketing purposes. And so I highly suspect that it's going to have a little bit, a couple more hooks in it that we're going to want to maybe stay away from in the church world. But who knows? Google also gives out $10,000 a year to nonprofit organizations for Google AdWords. So
as long as you sign the right piece of paper.
Hey, dude, listen, I didn't say that. I am neither here nor there.
Yeah, there's a few strings attached with those two. With the church world comes out like, hey, Google gives away free 10 grand to churches. Well, do they? They do if you don't get caught.
All right. And if you don't use things like, hey, Google's bad in some of your advertisement. But that's another thing. Yeah, cool. I would, the reason I'm asking this is Tom Pounder has been posting a lot of stuff in one of our fairly large Being the Church Digitally Facebook groups. And we've been talking a lot with Tom and Kenny in those groups about AI. And I would love to, those of you that are listening and watching, I'd love to hear your comments and love to hear your feedback. Obviously, you can hit Mark or I up. We've got our DM information in the show notes. Also, all of the Facebook links and all of the links that Mark was talking about to the article from, I'm going to totally forget this guy's name right now. The gentleman that you talked to,
York Moore. Yeah,
there we go. York Moore, York Peppermint Patty. I probably never heard that before, has he?
He's probably brand new to that.
Yeah. He's been in the game long enough. So with AI, actually, the interesting thing that's happening for me, so I currently use two different programs, actually, pretty much all the time. Three different programs. I'm using either Final Cut Pro, I'm using Adobe Premiere, or Adobe After Effects, and those are kind of three programs I'm constantly living in. Plus, I record maybe 4 podcasts a week, maybe up to 6 and 7 podcasts a week. Like I'm constantly looking at a camera and talking to the internet, it feels like. And one of the things I'm constantly doing out of that is recording things and this stupid cam link. Recording things and then bringing them into a software and editing them. And Adobe recently released their very own AI podcast generating tools. And there's also another company called Pod something or other. And literally, I do a podcast with the amazing Ashley Lagos called The Hybrid Disciple. And the very last episode was the first episode that I've done by using one of these hybrid tool or these AI tools. And I gave it our full 45-minute interview, both cameras, both audio files, put it right into Premiere, said that I wanted it to change, however many times, kind of gave it some parameters, walked away for about 2 minutes and came back, and this thing had cut and it had automatically leveled and it had automatically done transitions for both. It was essentially just multicam editing. It was something that would have taken me an hour to do. It did it in 2 minutes. And I was like, whoa. So after that, then I took that, I exported that. Obviously, I had to clean up some things and add some intros and outros and music. And, it still took another 45 minutes after that. But like the actual editing was cut in half. Then I uploaded it to another service to just like play around and see what was going to happen. Threw it up to this service, and essentially what the service did was take this podcast video and create shorts for me. And it took it was about a 45-minute podcast. Took 45 minutes and cut it down into like 13 or 14 different shareable social shorts with captions, with emojis, with like clips and reactions and all sorts. Some of it was real bad, but some of it was actually like, whoa, I can use this. And, you know, it allows you to then edit it and kind of do its own thing. And it gives you, for the program I was using, like it gave me topics of what we were talking about. Like it had parsed our language and it was giving it like SEO-ified titles. You know, one of them was like, Ashley was talking about like how to be the best disciple you could be or something like that. And the title that the program spit out was literally how to be the best disciple you can be. And she had never said those words, but it understood through the language that we were using that's what she was talking about. It was amazing. And I almost wonder if we can't start to, as the church, utilize some of these tools to better spread the gospel, not necessarily of the church itself or of each church's name itself, because like that's stupid and that's a battle we're going to lose. But Jesus said, you know, like, hey, I want to go and make disciples of all nations. And like the only way we're going to do that is to actually fortify the kingdom of God in this area. And it's like, man, if all I got to do is pay like $20 a month and I can have these tools that are constantly letting me churn out content that is going to be discoverable so that people can come into our churches, what's going to stop us, man?
Well, you know, I think the interesting thing is like, how does that continue to evolve, right? So sure, You're doing that. $20 isn't a big buy-in point. How many other people decide that they also want to do that? You know, how will that impact editors and things of that nature? How will that impact writing? I think, honestly, that has maybe one of the most dramatic impacts on the church as a whole is writing, because I'm not saying there's not, of course, there's other industries that rely heavily on writing, but the Christian world definitely and certainly does, right? We pump out a ton of Christian literature, and so reading is a major part of a lot of Christians' lives. And so what does it look like when AI can write every book that's basically being written right now, because we're not writing anything genuinely original? You know, maybe there's some original antidotes. What is that word? The
antidotes. Antiseptic.
Yeah, whatever it is. There's
antibiotics.
And there's some original antibiotics in each person's story. But for the most part, right, every leadership book that we churn out right now is just a rinse and repeat of the same thing, you know, with the exception of what Barna Group is putting out, where they're doing genuine research and they're actually producing things that are new. Internet doesn't have access to that, so ChatGPT isn't trained on that yet. But I think there's a lot of books that could just be written by ChatGPT right now that are currently being written. So I think a lot of Christian cannon fodder writing we'll see diminish, right? Because it will just honestly be cheaper for publishers to ask ChatGPT to write the book that you are going to spend 6 months writing, that's been written 500 times before and is going to be written 500 times afterwards, because you're writing another leadership book, and maybe you do have a slightly unique bent or a take on it, but it's certainly not one that doesn't exist in someone's brain and online somewhere. So ChatGPT can write it for you, and so I think that that's going to have a pretty dramatic impact. I think that we'll see more cannon fodder in terms of ChatGPT pushing out more Christian content, especially in the world of books. But I also think that will allow genuinely unique content to stand out above the rest. I could be totally wrong about that, but I have a good friend who's in the publishing industry, and he's already talked about the fact that, like, from the forefront, like, ChatGPT came out, and his company immediately began taking sermons of pastors who are contracted with them, punching them into ChatGPT, and ripping out 20,000 word books, like, immediately in their style. ChatGPT trained on its sermon, and then wrote a book that was longer than the sermon. And so, like, that is a reality that's going to come about. What does it look like for me to sit down and write a sermon series of 4 or 5 sermons back to back on prayer, punch that stuff into ChatGPT and say, give me a book in this style using this content on prayer? Well, now I've expanded my, if I'm writing 3,000 words a message, my 15,000 words becomes 30,000 words on prayer. And now it just needs proofread and make sure that it's all accurate, and we have a book. And I that's actually something that I could do right now, right? I'm writing a string of messages on the Lord's Prayer. Andy and I are. if we got done with this 8-week series and punched all of our text into Chat GPT and said, write the chapters on the Lord's Prayer, we could self-publish a book on the Lord's Prayer at the end of this series, at the end of July. Maybe we'll do that. Throw a graphic title on it that lets Chat GPT create it for us, and we can self-publish a book on Amazon. So, I mean, that's the way in which I think we're going to see a dramatic impact on the Christian world, is a higher volume of content coming out like that.
The other topic I wanted to talk about was something that we wanted to hit real quick, because what I realized was Mark and I are in meetings a lot, digital meetings a lot. And this is something that has evolved over the last 3-ish years, since really COVID hit and everyone started being on a Zoom meeting. I started to realize that people don't actually know how to hold meetings. Like, they don't actually know how to do proper things. As my camera froze again, they don't actually know how to run meetings properly. And Mark, I've been in meetings that you've run. You've been in meetings that I've run. Like, I like to think we kind of have unlocked the code a little bit and we've cracked the case. We've broken it wide open. So, like, whenever you go to hold a meeting, like, how do you run your best meeting?
Oh, geez. I think this just, once again, I feel like a broken record literally in these things, Andy, because I just feel like you're like, hey, how do you do this digitally? And I'm like, hey, I do it the same way I would do it physically.
Yep.
I really don't.
Don't tell anyone. Don't tell anyone that we just keep running it back.
Yeah, it's just the same piece of advice. So I think a lot of there's some truth to that. Like, to a certain extent, there's a lot of it that I'm like, well, I just kind of do the same thing as I always have done in meetings, in terms of, like, we come with an agenda, like what we do. I think maybe the biggest thing for me when it comes to meetings is I personally hate meetings. So because I hate meetings, one of the best pieces of advice that I can give to people who are trying to figure out what they're going to do at digital meetings is, like, try not to do things in meetings that you don't need to do. And I think that's truer in digital space than in others. I also think that meetings over 6 to 8 people become basically superfluous. They might as well be completely useless, because as soon as you break 6 to 8 people, the lines of communication, it become consistently more and more blurry, and it becomes a whole heck of a lot harder to use. And so, like, smaller meetings for sure, I think, is really important. That's where I would start. And then from there, making sure that the time people are spending online with you, that time isn't superfluous or meaningless. And we can get into some equipment and stuff too, because I think that theoretically could be important.
So, Mark, you mentioned gear there. What do you mean in terms of, like, hey, you need a light and a good microphone? Like, is that all you need to run a good meeting?
Well, I'm not saying that's all that you need. I think that we sort of are in this mode of so I think that church world, we really do try to put our best foot forward in terms of the environments that we create and what people come into. And I think that we want to do things with a high level of excellence. If you're listening to this show, it's probably you as well. I think that's really great. For some reason, that sort of stops when it comes to what we do on the internet. And so, we'll have a church who will spend, 60 or 70 or 80 grand on a new soundboard that will go in. And then when their pastor goes live on Facebook or joins a Zoom meeting, just flips open a laptop and that's it, right? We're just talking internal cam. And I'm not saying there's necessarily anything wrong with that with some internal teams. Maybe if that's just your staff, I'm not even saying there's anything wrong with it if it's, let's say it's just your staff and you're just meeting with them and whatever, it is what it is. But I think if you're meeting with people from your church, things like an attractive background, things like a computer that won't freeze and die on you, things like a microphone that won't turn you into a robot, things like a camera, like a decent webcam. You don't need a $20,000 studio to make those things happen, but a church should invest. If they're going to spend, 50 grand on a soundboard, they should invest $2,000 or $3,000 in at-home setups to have a decent enough computer with a decent microphone, a decent light, a decent camera, so that you can actually be professional in the environments that you're in. And I've seen this with a lot of organizations. I met with a guy who was repping like a new discipleship app. And like his computer froze halfway through it. And the only way for us to really have the conversation, he had to turn on the Facebook blur, the webcam blur, which kept cutting off his ears. And I'm like, bro, like we need something's got to change here. Like this isn't working. Like tell your boss to here, and I sent him like a kit, $800. Here's a micro PC, a camera, a light, a monitor, a mouse, a keyboard, and a USB microphone. These things will do wonders for you. But I think it is stuff like that that we need to at least be, theoretically considering if we're going to be serious about digital ministry and about digital meetings. It can't look like crap. It can't sound like crap. Otherwise, it's just more inclination for people to disengage.
Agreed. The biggest thing that I have noticed, obviously, is camera. Choice of software is always good. Ultra Live is great for meetings. Zoom is fine. Everyone uses Zoom. It's kind of ubiquitous. I've noticed a trend back from Zoom into Google Meet, and I would highly recommend staying away from Google Meet because it super sucks. I'm going to recommend Ultra Live. Google Meet's just like, it's free, and you get what you pay for with that. With Ultra Live, you get as many meeting rooms as you want with one subscription. Like you can't beat that. Zoom obviously is ubiquitous, and you can put it on everything. But my recommendation would be Ultra Live. Go click the link in the bottom. In the show notes, you can get free, a very large free trial. Actually, we're kind of upping our trial limits here pretty soon, which is pretty dope.